Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Straight On Till Morning. The Water Girls. Once they were out of the jungle, Tinkerbell chose to hug the curvy coast rather than cross the water, which would have been faster. And when Wendy took a detour over the waves to get a closer look at a whale spouting, she realized why. The mild breezes that kept her cool on the beach were whipped into much stronger versions of themselves over the ocean. She found herself suddenly pitched out of control by a rogue gust and in danger of being batted out of the sea, or out of a good donkey. A bit too Icarius there, she chastised herself, using her arms to somewhat unprettily flap her way back to the land. Tinkerbell wisely only skimmed over the shallowest wavelets that encroached the beach. She dipped a finger into the surface as she went, throwing up a pretty little spray that made rainbows on the golden sunlight. Fish left over her wake, flashing silver. Wendy caught her breath at the thoughtless beauty of it all. The fairy didn't care how others perceived what she did. She just did whatever she wanted. The results were often grace and spectacle. When Wendy did what she wanted, people hated it. Like at parties, like at Christmas, when she had been so full of beauty of the season and the festive caroling music that she had made the mistake of enthusiastically telling how a Neverland holiday might run. Utterly unaware, at first, that not only did the people there not care about the holidays of an imaginary world or its cleverly inventing trappings, but also there was more than a little horrified that these stories came out of the mouth of a 16-year-old and not a child. She also had been unaware at the time that her behavior would become the prime topic of jokes and gossip for the next season. Back in the reality of Neverland, the dark peaks of the Dragon Mountains glowered in the far distance, ominous smoke circling like a scar. Gray and brown twists of vapor rolled at each other. Like serpents, the air was so thick that it textured mass. Everything together fooled the eye into thinking there was an actual dragon, the size of a city, slithering through the landscape. Many after they found Peter Pan and saved Neverland, Wendy could explore the mountains and look for real dragons. She wondered how the fairy dust would last. It would, of course, be far more fun with someone else along, even a foul-tempered fairy. The northern side of the Mermaid Lagoon was a rocky, leisurely half-moon with a strip of jungle clinging to its stony spine. Flickering through green shadows were bright birds in orange, green, and yellow flocks. Here, the clean, salty slap of the salt of the sea air was replaced by a heavy atmosphere of exotic blooms and ancient earthly decay. Tinkerbell headed for a gray ledge studded with palm trees, a hidden platform for which they could survey the water below. She landed silently and then crawled to the edge, peep over the side, keeping her body flat and out of the sight from the ground. Wendy did her best to emulate the fairy, but her long shirt kept tangling in her legs. Frustrated in a huff, she decided it was safe that no one but a girl fairy around to see her and hiked the dress up between her knees. Ignoring Tink's eye roll at her awkward maneuver, she leaned over the links of the rock for a look. A parasitical lagoon lay below them. The water was an unbelievable, unreal turquoise, its surface so still that every feature of the bottom would be admired in a magnified detail. Colorful pebbles, bright red kelp, fish as pretty and colorful as jungle birds. A waterfall on the far side fell softly from a height of at least 20 feet. A triple train rainbow graced its frothy bottom. Large boulders stuck out of the water at seemingly random intervals, black and sun-warm and extremely inviting, like they had been placed there on purpose by some ancient giant, and on these were the mermaids. Wendy gasped at their beauty. Their tails were all the colors of the rainbow, somehow managed not looking tawdry or clownish. Despite deep royal blue, glittery emerald green, coral red, anemone purple, slick and wet, and as beautiful as the salmon Wendy's father had caught on a holiday in Scotland, shiny and voluptuously alive. The mermaids were rather scandalous naked, except for those who wore carefully placed shells and starfish, although their hair did some effort of decorum as it trailed down their torsos. Their locks were long and thick and sinuous, and mostly the same shade as their tails. Some had very tightly coiled curls, some had braids, some had decorated their tresses with limpets and bright hibiscus flowers. Their human skins were familiar tones, dark brown to pale white, pink and beige and gold and everything in between. Their eyes were familiar eye colors, but strangely clear and flat, either depthless or extremely shallow, depending on how one started. They sang, they brushed their hair, they played in the water. In short, they did everything mythical and magical mermaids were supposed to do, laughing and splashing as they did. "Oh," Wendy whispered, "there," and then she stopped. Tinkerbell was giving her a funny look, an unhappy funny look. The mermaids were beautiful, indescribably perfectly beautiful. They glowed and were radiant and seemed to suck up every ray of sun and sparkle in the water. Wendy found she had no interest in looking anywhere else. Sometimes when he's down, he goes to Mermaid Lagoon. Wasn't that what Cubby had said? Of course it had made sense. Just a few moments of watching these mysterious beings made Wendy feel light and happy all over. But imagine having to compete with them. Even if the fairy and Peter weren't involved romantically, this would have been a hard act to follow. What kind of girl, even just a friend, wouldn't grow jealous of a crowd of the most extraordinary, beautiful creatures on the planet? One of the ones to whom your best friend turned whenever he was down. Stupid girls. There's so many, all over Neverland, and you in London. Skipper had said that. Who knew what other sirens populated this island? Selkies, fairy princesses, normal princesses, pirate queens, dryads, naiads. Wendy decided to say nothing about these exquisite beauty of the mermaids. "Oh, here they are, but I don't see Peter Pan," she said, instead narrowing her eyes and casting her gaze to every obvious shadow and cranny. Tinkerbell shook her head slowly, thoughtfully. "Perhaps we should..." Wendy's voice trailed off. The old Wendy would have stood up and marched on down to find out where he had gone, questioning the pretty mermaids closely. The new Wendy, Neverland Wendy, paused. She had been held hostage by black-hearted pirates whom she thought she had made a simple deal. She had nearly been killed when crossing a harmless clearing, and these beautiful, innocent-looking mermaids in their beautiful lagoon, were they what they actually seemed? Were their teeth just a little sharper than those of their human counterparts? "Perhaps we should continue to surveil this situation from up here," Wendy said finally, sitting up straight, her back legs crossed. She cupped her hands around her mouth. "Hello down there, good afternoon." Immediately the mermaids froze. Some dove down into the water. They made their S's of their bodies like snakes, keeping their heads above the surface. All fixed her with their large, unblinking eyes. The one with the largest rock stayed where she was. She had tightly braided purple locks and gripped the sides of her gray stone with fingers now seemed a little more claw-like than human. She relaxed when her eyes found Wendy. So did all the mermaids, as if they saw her at the same time, as one. "Don't be afraid," Wendy called. "I'm not going to hurt you." "Oh, that's nice," the leader said. Her tail began to squish behind the rock. The tip of her fin just touching the water, flipping it so droplets split in the air. The other mermaids began slowly as well, treading water or beating their tails. They kept their faces halfway through the surface, however, noses firmly beneath. It was a little more than disturbing. While Wendy knew logically mermaids could breathe underwater, it seemed very natural to hold themselves that way. No bubbles burbled up. Humans are always trying to catch us, the purple one said, pouting. Nasty pirates. I'm not a pirate, Wendy said quickly. I'm just escaped from being their prisoner, in fact. Nasty piratess, another one said, pink-haired, kicking herself up above the water for a moment she could speak, her tail working and sliding. A little surprising because servants can't speak, of course, Wendy thought. Then she wondered what suddenly made her think of serpents. Humans want to steal from us. A lock for our beautiful hair, a red-haired one growled. Her locks weren't merely ginger. They were flaming tomato poppy red. Red as a ladybug or lips of some inappropriately dressed woman. Oh, I wouldn't do that, Wendy promised, though your hair is beautiful. It's the most beautiful hair I've ever seen. Tinkerbell rolled her eyes, but the mermaids rolled in the water, smiling and hissing. They seemed to like what she said quite a bit. We can't see you very well, the purple one called out. We can't see your hair. Our eyes don't work very well above water. Come down so we can see you. Yes, a green-haired beauty bag, so we can see her hair. So we can comb it, another one said. So we can brush it, a third said. The mermaids swam back and forth in the lagoon, pleating and making dizzying patterns. They were beautiful and plaintive and hypnotizing to watch. Wendy's heart shrugged with terrible pain. Such a scene had only existed in her wildest, most secretive fantasies. One she hadn't even told her brothers about. How she would make friends with such beautiful mermaids, and these two would comb each other's hair and laugh and sing, and maybe the mermaid would make fun of her voice. For Wendy could manage simple hymns and popular songs all right, but she was no siren. And then they would trade combs. Wendy would give the mermaid the silver-handled brush the darlings had given her for Christmas one year, and the mermaid would give her an ivory comb, or maybe one made from a fish skeleton with a tiny translucent teeth. And they would forever remain friends, and even if they were apart, they could think of each other every time they brushed their hair. Wendy wanted nothing more to lean over and plunge into the water below, to sit on a rock and have them do her hair in proper mermaid style. Long and down and flowing, with a flower or sea star for decoration. But their enticements were a little overmuch, their teeth a little sharp. Oh, I would love to. After I've asked a few questions, Wendy said apologetically. What? The leader called out, pointing a hand to her ear. I'm afraid I can't hear you. I said I have a few questions. The mermaids were silent. All of them were silent. They stared at her without blinking. It was like she had reached a dead-end game. Wendy groaned inwardly. I will come down to talk to you, she said, regretting every word. But not to the water's edge. I'm afraid of falling in, you see. I'm not a terribly good swimmer. She thought it was a good story, but Tinkerbell shook her head and slapped a hand over her face. There was another ledge just a little bit below the one they sat on that still seemed a safe distance from the water. Wendy clambered down as neatly as she could, trying not to further her already ruined dress. Neverland was not easy on one's clothes. Perhaps that's why the little fairy's skirt was all ragged at the hem. If Wendy wasn't careful, she'd wind up in animal skins and purloined gear like the Lost Boys. Or, heavens forfend, as naked as the mermaids. Tinkerbell was a bit wary, taking a long, lingering monument before drifting away in a lazy spiral down to where Wendy stood 4 or 5 feet above the water. She crossed her arms, upset that they had given in even this much. But the mermaids left and played at joy at this developing, swimming up close and almost under Wendy. And then again in their backs like otters. What are you wearing? Take it off this moment. You can't swim in that. I do not plan on swimming anytime soon. As I mentioned before, I can't swim very well, Wendy said primly. And anyway, we came up here with urgent business. Bah! The blue-haired mermaid stuck out her lip and splashed water with the tip of her tail so expertly that it hit Wendy square in the face. The mermaids laughed and tithered and drove and flipped. Here's to business, another one said, hitting her tail even harder on the water. This time Wendy managed to cover her face, but it was a large volume of water drenched her hair on her head and hair. It was a hot day and the weather was cool, so it wasn't the most unpleasant thing at first. But the jungle air at the edge of the lagoon was close and her dress was in her clumps now. No one likely to dry her shadow seemed outraged. She took herself off from top to bottom and wrung herself out like a towel, throwing little droplets everywhere. Tinkerbell peeped out from a large monstera leaf she had managed to duck behind. Her eyes widened in wonder at the giant salty droplets that rained down on the green shield. Then she noticed the sopping wet human girl. She giggled and pointing. All right, Wendy said gamely, trying to keep her smile. Her shadow straightened herself out and herself back in place behind Wendy, but very behind Wendy, keeping her as sort of a bulwark against some splashes of shadow water. Very funny, but really, I'm here for a rather serious request. You see, Peter Pan, the red-haired one sighed, flipping herself off onto her back and swimming dreamily across the lagoon. That Peter Pan, a green-haired one whistled. What do you know of Peter Pan? The purple-haired one, still on the rock, eyes narrowing. The pink-haired one swam up closely to Wendy, near the bottom of her ledge, listening intently. Well, he and I have some things to sort out, Wendy stammered. She didn't want to admit that she was responsible for a shadow being in the hands of pirates, whom these mermaids obviously feared and hated, and they didn't seem to have a great attention span. It would be difficult to make it all the way to the end, where she explained how she was trying to make reparations for what she had done. The pink-haired one grinned strangely up at her. Yes, Wendy asked politely, but the mermaid just fixed her giant caramel eyes and held up a giant vine draped over her hands. I don't understand, Wendy said. What? Suddenly the mermaid yanked. The vine snapped taut. The other end clung to a tree that was behind Wendy. She was thrown headfirst into the water. No, not the best swimmer, even in the calmest situation. Wendy panicked, throwing in water over her face as if expecting another splash. She hit the lagoon in the worst sort of tangled position. Mouth opening as she tried to cry it out. Salt water immediately ran down her throat and up her nose. She coughed and choked and sneezed, flailing her around and trying to desperately to right herself. Her dress swirled and caught up around her legs and waist, tangled her limbs utterly and weighing her down. Her toes touched the bottom. This shocked into her thinking again, and she kicked up toward the surface. Help! Wendy called as soon as her mouth was out of water, instead of breathing, which might have been a better call. A mermaid took this opportunity to grab her hair and yank her head back. Wendy's lower half flipped up her torso, bent toward the water, forcing a river's worth of water up her nose. She coughed and floundered. Opening her eyes under water didn't cause any extreme comfort, although what she saw did. The sinuous forms of mermaids cutting back and forth through the current quick as knives. She tried to paddle to the surface, whole lessons finally kicking in. She pushed her legs hard, hoping to connect with one slick bodies. Her left foot did. It was just enough to propel her to the surface. She didn't waste any time this time. She sucked in a deep breath of air. The mermaids laughed and porpoised around her, their grins hard and white. Their mouths seemed to be a little wider than they should have been, their teeth even sharper. One of John's random facts popped into her consciousness. How some sharks have 4 rows of teeth, one inside the other, to more quickly disembowel their prey. "Tinkerbell!" she cried. "Help!" The fairy hovered on the air, watching the commotion thoughtfully, or could have been disinterestedly. Slimy, strong hands grabbed Wendy's waist and tugged down. The mermaid didn't manage to pull her entirely underwater. She had expected the human girl to be as lithe as one of them. So the mermaid leapt out of the water and landed with her hands on Wendy's shoulders, trying to push her down from above. Once again, this mermaid wasn't strong or heavy enough to do much besides dunk Wendy for a moment. But they were learning. Hands and mouths grabbed at her body and dress, pulling and pushing her down to drown her with their combined efforts. "Tinkerbell!" Wendy sputtered. The fairy, hanging above the lagoon, shook her head slowly. This was the last thing Wendy saw. Last thing was the fairy flying off away into the jungle. Tinkerbell had given up on the human girl and her hopeless situation. Wendy went under. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.